I went to the Amazon jungle and met God. But before I tell you what God said to me, I'm going to show you how I got there. When I was 19, I had a near-death experience. And I went from being extroverted, outgoing, and enthusiastic and energetic to being completely overcome by my shadow because I kept this near-death experience to myself. I didn't know how to talk about it. And as I kept this pain buried inside, the shadow groomed larger and larger, and it took over my life. And I became an introverted, antisocial, angry, bitter person with a worldview that said, God loves my enemies, the world is a dangerous place, and people can't be trusted. And I lived that way for 15 years until I started to realize what was happening. Until finally, I went to the jungle, and for 3 weeks, I was in isolation. And the entire time, I was having an experience that I'm going to walk you through on this channel that's taken me quite some time to process. But before that, I want to share with you some common myths of the spiritual journey. The first myth, the most important one, is that spiritual awakening takes an entire lifetime. We're taught that, you must pray and be religious and do all these techniques and devote thousands of hours on this path, and then finally one day you'll have this experience and everything will kind of come together. And I'm here to tell you that that's not true, because the spiritual dimension operates outside of the space-time dimension. Space and time really are irrelevant in the spiritual dimension, because the spiritual dimension occupies everything. It's not like, there's this finite amount of space that contains the spiritual dimension. No, it's everywhere. It's everywhere in every space, in every dimension, always. And so time doesn't make sense as well in the spiritual dimension. It's not like, 16 billion trillion years ago, the spiritual dimension was created. The spiritual dimension has always been there, and it will always be there, because it just always is. It is infinity in space, and it is infinity in time. There is no beginning nor end to the spiritual dimension. So saying that it's going to take me 50 years of praying or doing breath work and then finally I'll have my spiritual awakening, it doesn't make any sense. Depending on the way you perceive this journey, you could have your awakening just like that. And this channel is dedicated to showing you how to safely walk the spiritual path, how to do it with guidance, how to do it with intent in a way that gives you quantum leaps in your spiritual growth. And it's going to show you how time is basically irrelevant. Whenever you think through the dimension of time, it essentially engages the default mode network. This is the part of the psyche which is used to operating on time. So when I was in the jungle, I was in isolation. I had no watch, I had no cell phone, I had no laptop, no Wi-Fi, no music. I was just there. And I was relying on the sun to tell me what time it was. And one thing that taught me was that time eventually, it just stopped. I remember one day I was sitting there and I remember looking at the sun for hours, and I was just like, the sun hasn't moved. You know, so this habitual way of living that says, you know, oh, you know, it's 7:30 a.m. I need to, you know, go for a workout and do this by this time and all that stuff. It's the modern era of human psychology that has you living in habitual repetitive ways. Whenever you live in habitual repetitive way, you're living through the default mode network, and you can't think outside the boundaries of that pattern in your brain. And to progress through the spiritual path outside the default mode network allows you to access your imagination. And the one thing that's crucial for your spiritual journey is your ability to access the imagination. If you cannot, then you are trying to use your mind to advance yourself on the spiritual path. You're operating in the space-time dimension, and it will take you 60 plus years to get there because you are operating through the default mode network. You're trying to use willpower rather than intention and imagination to get you to where you want to go. So this channel is dedicated to showing you how to do that, to take quantum leaps on your spiritual journey in a safe, methodical way. You know, one of the greatest scientists who have ever lived, we think of as immediately as Albert Einstein. This man is basically known to be the greatest genius of all time, right? We think of that name and we associate his name with intelligence and, you know, all the ways that he's impacted humanity through his intelligence. But interestingly enough, Einstein, and this is what we don't really talk about this part of his life much, is that Einstein was actually not very skilled at mathematics. Einstein was relying on his colleagues repeatedly to help him out with the mathematics. But what Einstein did was he cracked the code to his imagination. He had a vision while he was sleeping of himself traveling in a train at the speed of light. And right outside of the window of the train was a photon that was traveling with him at the speed of light. And when he woke up, he had this intuitive understanding. He had this embodiment of information that led to this download of the theory of relativity from a source that was outside of Albert Einstein. And you see this in inventors across time. They have this one thing in common. They had the ability to connect to their imagination. And when you can do that, you can harness your imagination to give yourself the ability to take a giant step forward on your spiritual path. So as we do this, we remember that the biggest myth of spirituality is that it takes an entire lifetime. It's not true. You can have it as soon as you develop a methodical way to get there. Another thing is that we've confused intelligence for success. We think that the way that we're living today is that the intellect is highly rewarded. But when that happens, you strengthen the default mode network. When you think you have figured everything out, your imagination turns off. And you're trying to use willpower to figure everything out with your mind. That's great. The mind is a tool. But when that happens, what the next step is that it cuts you off from your heart. So you're all up here, and then the infinite intelligence inside of your heart is just cut off. It can't get the messages up to the mind because the mind's door is closed, because it's trapped in a box. So, the one thing that I'm going to show you in this channel is how to align the mind and the heart. Okay, that is crucial, because if we can't do that, then you might work your entire life on a goal and then achieve that goal and realize that you actually don't care about it. How many of you have had success in getting a promotion, getting into a relationship, buying a new car or going on a vacation, thinking that that's what you wanted, and then you got it, and then you had this feeling like, that's it? That's what I worked so hard for? The reason that you're feeling that way is because it came from the mind, and the heart's messages were not being received because the mind was too loud. So we talked about the first myth, which was spirituality takes a lifetime. The awakening takes a lifetime. That's not true. The second myth is that meditation and spiritual practices calm your anxiety. That's the very surface level of what meditation can do for you. And mindfulness is great. If that's something that you're using as a tool to help you maybe go to sleep, or to help you stay grounded or be able to concentrate, that's great. But what happens on the spiritual journey over time is that the more you meditate, the more you become aware of. So your awareness goes up, which means all of the conditioning inside of you, all of the suppressed memories inside of you start to come up into your awareness. You start to become more aware of all the suffering going on in this world. And this is an unpleasant truth. But this is what we're here to process. And as you meditate and as your awareness increases, you will start to realize things that irritate you and make you angry, make you sad, and make you fearful. That energy will start to come up more often. But through a method, you can start to see that simply as energy. And when you detach yourself from what's happening, you allow that energy to pass through you. And as you observe and without judging, and you just allow the energy to pass through, you're undoing your karma. You are dissolving the shadow. You are merging with it, and you are expressing, you're becoming more of what Carl Jung called the golden shadow. And that's what he means. When Carl Jung talks about the golden shadow, he means that there's this part inside of you that's very dark and it's very negative, but pay close attention. Imagine that part of you is like this black ball of death that we all have. It is completely fearful, it is judgmental, it is angry, it is jealous, it is insecure. But inside of that ball of death shadow lies the golden shadow. And what that means is when you allow the energy to come up and you observe it, you can penetrate that energy, and from that awareness, from that presence, you will receive some gift. And that gift is your soul's blueprint. It's what you're here to do. It is your gift. It is your talent. It is your passion, all wrapped in one. And so, as you do this, you'll start to see that, okay, I am feeling something. Something is rising. It doesn't feel very good, but who is it that's actually feeling it? You know, who you are, you're not just flesh and bone. You're not simply a human. You are an infinite energy. you have no boundaries. You have the unlimited capacity to observe. And so that is going to give you a new perspective to take on challenges that we can avoid because it feels so uncomfortable. So as we do this, you're going to have so many different tools, but you're also going to have this place inside of you that you can go to at any time. It's going to be your spiritual home, and we're going to give ourselves a mental cleaning, a spiritual cleaning, and progress through this journey through leaps and bounds.